I want to talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is the most important thing. Jesus said, if you do not forgive others, you will not be forgiven. The measure you use will be used against you. He gave a parable about a person who his master forgave him all his debts, but then he wouldn't forgive people underneath him his debts. And so he was a hypocrite and he wasn't given forgiveness. I want to talk about why forgiveness is so important. So, one could argue that hell is not a bad place, it's a fair place, one being me and people like me. Hell is a very fair place. That's why it's so terrible, because it is so fair. Everybody gets what they gave. What you've done to the least of these brothers of mine, you've done to me. What you've done to others will be done to you. You will feel everything that you have done harm to other people. That is hell. And it's fair. It's perfect. It was designed and it is perfect. In fact, this world is very unfair, much more unfair than hell. Hell is perfectly fair. There's no unfairness in it. That's the worst part about it. The people who are in hell will know that it is fair, and they will accept that their punishment is fair. But one thing that bothered me was, couldn't you argue that heaven is also then unfair? Because you have people who are in heaven who deserved punishment and wrath, and yet somehow they got pardoned. How did that happen? And how is that fair? And it's not about fair by this point. It's about God doing what he wants. And he loves who he wants, and he hates who he wants. And he can forgive who he wants, and he could choose not to forgive who he wants. And Jesus demonstrated that with his life. When Jesus was here, the Jews hated the idea that Jesus was just going around choosing to forgive whoever he wanted. First of all, because they didn't recognize him as the Son of God. But second of all, the very idea that God is not bound, they have this mechanical view of God, that God is like some kind of a robot that you can manipulate. Like it's just a bunch of rules and laws, and it's a system that you can just trick. You could trick your way into it. You can follow all the rules and yet be evil on the inside and think that you've fooled your way through the gates of heaven. And the Jews had this view of God that was so foolish like this, that God can be fooled and that they can fool God. And they were only fooling themselves. So it was a number of things. It was one, they didn't accept the divinity of Jesus, and two, they didn't like the idea of God just forgiving whoever he wanted. And even Christians struggle with this. They say, oh, there has to be a price. No. Listen, if you forgive somebody, you can just forgive somebody. And there doesn't have to be an exchange. God is not transactional, you know. Just so you know, God can forgive somebody without having to be bought off or bribed or have an exchange made. Okay? Jesus demonstrated this. He forgave who he wanted for whatever reason he wanted. That was his discretion. And it is rooted in love. His forgiveness was rooted in love. But know this, Jesus did say, if you do not forgive others, you will not be forgiven. The reason why so many people of the world's major religions hate Jesus, one of the reasons, is because what he's basically saying is your faith is not nearly as important, because faith comes and goes. It's not nearly as important as your ability to forgive. Because if you can forgive others, then it is fair and okay for God to forgive you. But if he forgives you and you will not forgive others, it makes God unfair. This person was a hypocrite. He wouldn't forgive others, but then expects to be forgiven. The only way God can forgive somebody and not be considered unfair, not like he has to answer to anybody, but he himself seems to be concerned about doing what is always right. It wouldn't be fair to forgive somebody who doesn't forgive others, and Jesus explained this. You could have all the faith in the world and do all the good deeds in the world, but if you do not forgive somebody, you are not forgiven. Jesus said this. Even if Jesus had not said this, I would still be saying this, because the principle still stands. The person is a hypocrite. Doesn't forgive others, but expects to be forgiven? Come on. The measure you use will be used against you. Jesus said that. So, a question I want to bring up, because this is something that I've had to think about carefully, because I care more about going to heaven than anything else. All I care about is being with my mom, being with my dogs. All I care about is heaven. That's all I care about. It's my only priority. Nothing else matters in comparison. Everything else is a mere distraction in comparison. I will set everything down if I thought that in any way my place in heaven was jeopardized. And so forgiveness is a very big one. If you believe what Jesus said was true, and if you don't think that he was a liar, if you think he's a liar, that's a different problem. But if you think he always told the truth, and when he said, if you do not forgive, you will not be forgiven. It's funny because Christian churches don't teach this. They don't teach the repentance of sin, and they also don't seem to ever teach much about the absolute necessity to forgive others. Why? And that doesn't even cut into their overhead, It doesn't cut into their profit. It's not like Matthew 17, which tells us that you don't have to tithe, that a king doesn't tax his own children. But it's just strange that they don't teach about forgiveness when it is so important. I wonder if this is almost satanic. Like there's an evil spirit behind this church that it's teaching in Jesus' name, but they're not spreading his message. And one of the most important things he taught was forgiveness. In fact, what was the final lesson he used with his own life on the cross at the end? Forgive them, Father, they don't even know what they're doing. He gave forgiveness to the people who put him there unfairly. You see, because God is not a hypocrite. He wouldn't tell us to forgive others, but then not forgive others. That's how you know how strong. Listen, that's how you know you are forgiven, because God is not a hypocrite. You are investing in God's integrity. God does not tell us you have to forgive others, but then chooses not to forgive one of us because of some terrible crime. It doesn't work that way. He'd be a hypocrite. He wouldn't be God. The only way God does not forgive someone is if they will not forgive others. I know, someone's going to say, what about the unforgivable sin of hatred of the Holy Spirit? I'm trying to keep this simple, okay? Yeah, there was a rare exception of the Jewish Pharisees in Jesus' time who witnessed miracles, knew they were in the presence of God, but hated God anyway. This goes against God gathering consent for you to even be in heaven in the first place. They were clearly not giving their consent, and so this, just because of who they were, being unrepentant and so on. Yeah, but it's a rare exception. It's not every day you come across the Son of God who is doing miracles. So I didn't want to bring that up because it's like a 0.0001% of things that happen. For the rest of us in that 99.99% group, the only thing that you can really do to not be forgiven is if you don't forgive others. So I want to ask you this. Are you sure that you've forgiven everyone in your life? Because I'm willing to bet a lot of you will fail on this test that I'm about to give you. It's a test that I used for myself to be sure, because I've had people do me wrong in my life, and I needed to be sure, have I really forgiven them? So here's what it looks like if you've truly forgiven someone. And some of you are really not going to like this. That's okay. We need to get to the bottom of this, because if you are not forgiving others, you are not forgiven. And I'm trying to allow people to reach forgiveness. Okay, that's one of the reasons why I'm still in this world. If it were up to me, I would have already left this place to go be with Toby and everyone else in heaven. But I'm still here, so I'm here for a reason. So if somebody's done you wrong, and you hope they see judgment for it, if you hope they go to hell for it, you have not forgiven them. Let me explain before you get too angry. Forgiveness is almost very similar to the word pardon. You forgive them, you pardon them. When you what good is it, what value is it if a judge pardons somebody, but then also says, but you're still going to get punished the same? Then the pardon was useless. Then you haven't forgiven them. Now, you're not hoping that there's no justice, because understand that they are under the same obstacle you're under. They have to forgive others or they won't be forgiven. And that if they reject God, they will be in judgment. So it's not like you're praying or hoping for injustice. What a person should do is pray and hope that this person has a change of heart, that they can face how they have done you wrong, have a change of heart. You should pray. And Jesus told us to pray for our enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, who do you wrong, do you harm. To pray for them. Pray that they would have a change of heart. That would be the best case scenario. So what I'm saying is, don't pray that they get to somehow dodge justice for being wicked. No, 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 no. Pray that they have a change of heart. Pray that they are able to find forgiveness. This is what we should be doing. This is the right answer. Now, for some of you, and this is what I mean, and this is why I'm saying this for your sake. If you hate this person so much that you hope that they do not have a change of heart. This kind of reminds me of the story of Jonah, right, in the whale. Right? He didn't want to go out and do what he was supposed to do. He didn't want these people to repent. He didn't want, he was actually the villain in the story, believe it or not. This is a massive mistake. It's detrimental, really. It means you still have unforgiveness in your heart. A pardon listen, they still have to face the judge. You are not the judge. You are just called to be blameless. You are not to have bloody hands. You are not to try to pretend to be like a judge. That's not your job. You are to be blameless. So you're like children of God and blameless. Okay? It's not your duty to be judge, jury, and executioner. And I'm not asking you to pray for injustice. I'm just saying you should pray for people to have a change of heart so that they can see forgiveness. When you pardon somebody, that's like saying what Jesus said on the cross. He's saying, forgive them. Forgive them. Because sometimes, at judgment, forgiveness can be the most bitter thing, to know that you did all this harm to this person who even forgave you for what you did to them. In judgment, it will be so hard for them. Because they will realize this person was no harm to them, no threat to them, and they did all these terrible things to this person for whatever weakness. And this person even forgave them. I mean, it just like seals the damnation. Forgiveness is not for the person being forgiven, it's for the forgiver. So for your sake, I would say you need to forgive others. You need to pardon others. You need to hope in your heart that this person does not see hell, that this person has a change of heart, does not see hell. There are so many obstacles in this person's way that it is probably unlikely. I don't even know any details about the person. I just know that the path to destruction is wide and the path to life is narrow. So just by odds alone, I can tell you they probably won't go to heaven. They will probably go to destruction, just statistically speaking. But you, for your own sake, you should pray that they be forgiven. For your sake. That is how you know you have forgiven others. And that is how you know you are forgiven. Because Jesus doesn't lie. God doesn't lie. He's not a hypocrite either. He won't say, you have to forgive others, but then he doesn't forgive you. For a lot of people who struggle with, feeling, are they saved or not? Well, now you don't have to struggle that much anymore. You're banking in God's character. You know that he's not a hypocrite. He told us to forgive others, so he has to forgive you. But the one exception is if you don't forgive others, you won't be forgiven. So if you forgive others, you are forgiven. If you've asked God for forgiveness and you've forgiven others, you are forgiven. You are saved. This is about a relationship with God. This isn't about some Jewish blood sacrifice ritual or all that other nonsense theology that came out of early Christianity. This is about a relationship with God, as Jesus said. All these people claiming to come in his name. And what was the real defining criteria? They didn't know who he was. They had no relationship with God. They did not know who God was. And that is what cast them away. They had no relationship with God. Man, it is hard times we live in. It is. I'm going to ramble for a little bit till I carry on subject. I'm just thinking about it. It is hard times. It really is. You've got all these different theories and opinions and theologies and all this stuff. This is why I just teach out of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm a simplist by nature, a minimalist. I've always stick to the most important things, so I'm not bogged down by things that actually don't matter. I'll hear people in Christian circles debating about ridiculous nonsense that doesn't even matter. It isn't even going to affect the salvation of others or themselves. It's just intellect. I see it all the time, everywhere I've gone, and it just tells me these people don't have their priorities honed in. Our priorities are to spread the message that Jesus taught. If you are a disciple of Jesus, You are not. Look, I can write my own fictional stories and have my own opinions, and I try to separate. What did I just separate? There we go. There's the new word for the day. I try to separate these things as best I can. I'll say, it's just my opinion, or I suspect, or I say this before a suspicion, but when I'm just straight up quoting Jesus or talking about the implications of what Jesus said, this is no longer my opinion anymore. Well, I guess maybe if I'm talking about the implications. If I'm quoting him, it's not, though. Our goal, our job, is simply to spread the message that Jesus spread. That's it. He told us to tell people. We can tell them about the miraculous signs. It's up to us. To tell people about his message of forgiveness and repentance of sin. But we're not here to spread the gospel of Paul. We're not here to spread the view of Isaiah. We're not here to do any of that. If you are a disciple of Christ, it means you simply just spread what Jesus taught. That's it. You don't have. It's so easy. It's so simple. It's so hard to get people to do just that, bogged down by all kinds of misdirection and debates and confusing things. How God feels about you is your place in heaven. This is something that I experienced when I was young. I came to this understanding and realization that how God feels about you is your place in heaven. So if he loves you, you will feel loved. You will feel loved. You will feel God's loved. And if you are hated, you will feel God's hate. If you were just, think of it like this. Let's say you were in a room. It's like a room cut off from everything else, right? And in this room, there's a lion cub in this room, and you're just beating this lion cub with a stick, okay? And on the other side of this room, there's this, one of those one-way mirrors, two-way, whatever you call them, where they can see through you, but you can't see them. The mama lion is on the other side watching you do this to its cub. What do you think is going to happen when that door opens and when you meet God? What do you think is going to... Yeah, that's right. We all know the answer. This room, this place, this existence, this simulation as they call it, it was a big test to reveal what each thing is made of. As God watched everything, saw everything, like that lion looking through the window. You didn't see him, but he saw you. And I tell you this, it means a great deal if you show remorse before that door opens, before you're sorry that you got caught, not sorry of what you did. Showing remorse at the scene of the crime has so much more value as opposed to showing remorse after you've been found and convicted. That means nothing by that point. Remorse literally means nothing by that point. To show remorse at the scene of the crime means everything. We are at the scene of the crime. This life is like it is the crime scene, and you're going to be in a courtroom. This is something else that I've experienced and I'm making an analogy for when I was younger. You will be in a courtroom after this life. You will be going through your life, moment to moment, everything you've done. It's going to get awkward, man. Real awkward, real embarrassing. You will be going through a review. Do you know the one thing that a lot of people who are in hell are going to regret? Not showing any remorse after they've just done harm. It's the lack of remorse that they're going to realize they are so screwed. So I use the analogy of the lion cub and the lion because that's the best way I can say it. To test what each thing is made of, they put you into a world where it's completely uncontrolled, it's free-willed, and you don't think you're being watched. Like so many people today don't think that there is a God watching them or that there is justice. If you want to think that, whatever, but just know the consequences will remain. Well, I shouldn't say whatever. It is a serious thing to have no faith. Which I just reviewed that real quick. That's not a good thing to say. If you want to have no faith, whatever. No. What I am saying is that whether you think someone's watching you or not. See, I know that there is a lion on the other side. And I'm not beating no lion cubs. Not only because A, I don't have it in me to beat lion cubs. And B, even if I did, I wouldn't do it because I know there's a lion watching on the other side. Do you know the terror that people are going to experience when that barrier lifts and they now see that lion and they see everything they've done? They become so aware of the guilt, their own shame. Do you know the terror that they're going to feel? God can make you feel however he wants in heaven, in eternity, I should say. Heaven sometimes is used in biblical terms as the word eternity, the place of eternal life. He can make you feel however he wants. See, in heaven, everything is his will. Jesus said that in this world, God's will is not in control. He said to pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven, meaning God's will is not done in this world. It's not done in this world, but in heaven, it is always done. We don't really even have free will by that point. His will is always done. For those that he loves, he can make them feel as happy as he wants, as joyful as he wants. He can make everyone feel whatever he wants. You will feel what is good and fair, and for many, they will weep. How God feels about you is your place in heaven. If he loves you, you will feel loved, and if he hates you, you will feel terrible. Jesus described it as a place of great weeping, gnashing of teeth, great sadness, regret. Don't be that person. Can you forgive the devil? This is interesting because the devil is going to be in hell. So to hope that he doesn't go to hell is not applicable. So it's not that. But can you forgive the devil? Because it is sometimes in a person's life the devil who is directly responsible for so much suffering that you had to go through. I know I did. In 2021, what happened in my life was demonic. Jenna and Faith passing away 3 weeks apart, completely different ages and breeds, and a 1 in a million condition for Faith. It was so rare what she died from. Lost my income. My car engine died. My septic tank broke. I couldn't run water down the pipe for like 8 months. Was running out of resources. Toby got a fatal disease, tick disease. Fortunately, he was spared, but everything else was taken from my life. Everything. I was left with nothing. It felt demonic. It felt like right out of the story of Job, where Satan was just continually going back to God for permission to do this, permission to do that, etc. And it wasn't like when my mom passed when I was 21, where it was just kind of a one-time tragedy. This was going on for months and months, just one loss after another. And it felt very much satanic. And so I was done a great hurt and a great harm by the devil. And that's opinion. I don't know. Could have been a whole bunch of massive coincidences. But I have the suspicion there was something demonic in all that. Some kind of witchcraft, something was causing so much harm to my life. Now I survived. And Toby did for another 3.5 years. But Jenna and Faith did not. And it was terrible. The amount of grief and sadness and suffering. So someone would ask me, can you forgive the devil for what he did to you? This is tricky. Because this is now very different. It's not one human forgiving another human, or this is it feels not applicable because it's asking a human to forgive a malevolent being that is not on the same plane. And Jesus did say that we are to pray for those who persecute us. He didn't say that there's certain people you don't forgive. And so we really don't have a biblical answer either way. Not really. I mean, maybe there's an expert out there who can say, yes, we do, in the chapter of Zechariah, whatever, one of those guys. But I do know in principle that Jesus told us to forgive everyone, to pray for those who persecute us. So if Satan is persecuting us, sounds like we're supposed to pray, or so we're supposed to forgive him, even though we know dang well where he's going, Can you forgive the devil? I'm not going to sit here and say you have to. There's nowhere in Scripture that says you have to. I just know that Jesus told us to forgive everyone. I mean, he even forgave the people who put him onto the cross unfairly. So that really shows, I'm not going to speak to whether or not you have to, because there's really no definitive answer to that. I personally would err on the side of caution and safety and say you should even forgive the devil for what he's done to you. That's part of being blameless. That's turning to the other cheek. He struck you and you just turned to the other cheek. You are like a lamb to the slaughter. You are blameless. Even forgive the devil. I know that sounds ridiculous to some people, but I would recommend doing it. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. So I need to talk about this. We are commanded by Jesus to forgive others, okay? But that doesn't mean you're going to forget how they did you wrong. And that doesn't mean you keep yourself vulnerable to where they can keep doing you harm. You should obviously withdraw, and so they can't hurt you anymore. Learn the lesson. Stay away from snakes, or they might bite you, right? Jesus never once anywhere said, and you have to completely forget it ever happened to you. No. It would be prudent, it would be wise to learn lessons and improve and avoid obstacles and pain and that sort of thing. So we are commanded to forgive others of everything, but it would be prudent to not forget the lesson and to avoid pain and trouble in that area. I want to say that. So a difficult example of this, I'm trying to think of other people's lives and the kind of situations that they're in, is if you're married to somebody. This is where it seems like most of the problems come up. I've been a monk my whole life. I've been single my whole life, so I don't have these problems. But I know people who have been married for a long time, and I've seen these problems from, an observer standpoint. If you are married to somebody, and this person, let's just say they're a cheater, they're constantly in adultery, and of course we live in a society that has no laws against adultery, so that makes it even worse. There's literally, the law does not avenge you out here, and there's nothing you can do. You just have to, you divorce them if they cheat, and if you don't want to be with them and be subject to that again, you divorce them and you separate from them. You just leave them. Okay. In the Old Testament, they would be stoned. So there's that. You wouldn't have to divorce them back in the day because they would be stoned. So because there was laws against adultery. We don't have laws against adultery. But anyway, you need to forgive them for what they did to you. Now I've heard one of my friends say, "Well, that's pretty hard." I thought, "Ow." And I hope and I pray for my friend's sake that he is able to find that forgiveness later in his life. He had a very difficult wife. Constantly disrespectful. She would always be talking down to him. Right in front of her friends, she would insult him. My stupid husband is so... What'd she say? Like, my stupid husband is so pathetic, he can't even make that much money. Even though the guy's working 3 jobs and she's never worked a job in her life and he's always supported her and their kids. She'll literally insult him right in front of her friends, right in front of him. That kind of disrespect. She's probably also been cheating. We've talked about this. There's good reason to believe she's been cheating. Okay? He's put up with all this, and he's the one who, when I told him about how he has to forgive, he said, "Well, I don't know about that." He said, "That's kind of hard." And I pray for him. I hope he can be the better person, be the bigger person, go to heaven. Listen, we all know where she's probably going, just odds, right? So he shouldn't be drugged down with her to where she's at. He should be the better person. He should forgive her. But at the same time, that doesn't mean he's got to put up with it. He doesn't have to forget what happened like it never happened. And he's got to keep exposing himself to this kind of harm. He can distance himself. He can leave. We have to forgive people, but it's best not to forget so you don't get hurt again. I think that's another problem, is a lot of Christians, they give this strange idea that forgiving is forgetting. No. They are different words for a reason. Otherwise, they'd be synonyms. They are different words. Okay. The only thing that forgetting comes into this is when it talks about, in Revelation, it talks about when God says, "I remember the sins of my people no more." Meaning he forgets his people's sins. That's God's forgiveness. that he has forgotten their sins. Now, we can't, here's the thing, we can't physically do that. Our brain, that's one of the things I always wish that I could do, that God can do, is to forget trauma, to forget negative things in my life. I always said so many times, if I could forget every negative thing that's ever happened to me, I would be the happiest, most joyful person on earth, because I would not have any trauma. I would not have anything that has shaped me into the grim person that I am, all those scars, it's like my old car, my 95 Honda Civic that I've had since 2002, all the dents, scratches, dings, and everything. I mean, it is so beat up, it is so battle damaged, that if you were to fix the whole body in front, it wouldn't even seem like the same car anymore. It still is, it'd be the best version of it, but it wouldn't feel like it. It would just be better, I guess. But I've always wished I could just forget terrible things. And we can't. Unfortunately, we simply do not have the ability to forget. So that's what I mean when I say we have the ability to forgive, but we don't have the ability to forget. So to tell people that if you're going to forgive someone, you also have to forget their sins, what I'm saying is that's not possible for us. We do not control our memory like that. Or at least most of us don't. I don't know. Maybe you have to have high-level delusion ability to do that. I don't know. Maybe that's something I should look into, right? Like I said, I'd be a happier person if I could choose to forget all of the terrible things that I've experienced. But they've made me who I am, right? No, we're not expected to forget. We don't have that power or ability. We're not God. We don't have that strength. God is the one who ultimately forgets all sins, forgets all sadness, forgets all death, forgets all the terrible things of this world. He forgets these things. And when God forgets something, one wonders, did it ever even truly exist? It existed for a time, temporarily, in this kind of a created world, but not eternally. It doesn't stay in eternity. This is the only time where terrible things happen. This little temporary place that we live in, this universe we call. But there is no evil or suffering or sadness or sin in eternity. There's just none. I was just reading today parts of Signs of the End of the Age, and the part where Jesus talks about, the four winds gathering God's people, gathering life basically from this earth. Jesus talked about how in the end that the angels are going to come and they're going to separate the wheat from the weeds, the desirable from the undesirable. And so this let us understand that He sees that there are good things and there are bad things in this world. There are some things that He wants to keep and there are some things that He does not want to keep forever. And so He does this process after this existence ends, which is it's going to be a long time from our perspective for this existence to end, but blink in eternity. So He gathers His elect from the world. Every one of those people, you know what they all have in common? They've all forgiven everyone. And they all have no pride. Yeah, pride is the root of pretty much all sin, other than madness. Pride is the root of all sin. You can always trace it back to pride. Thinking higher of yourself than you are. That's why you got to have a better car than the average person, because you think you're better than the average person. Better house than the average person, because you think you're better than the average person. That's why you think you can cheat with this person, because you don't care what happens to the spouse in the relationship. And this is pride. From theft to greed to murder. I mean, even murder. You think so. You think that you're better than this other person, so you could take their life, and it doesn't matter because it's like stepping on an ant, because you see yourself as, bigger than them, better than pride. Pride is the root of all sin. There are no proud spirits in heaven. And there are no unforgiving spirits in heaven. So these are two things you should root out of yourself. Get rid of your pride and make sure to forgive everyone. And a giant burden will be lifted from you, I'm telling you, if you have this I'm telling you, if you do this for the first time, it's going to feel like better than any chiropractor you go to, where they like pop people's like, neck and all that stuff and they feel better afterwards. Better than anything like that, spiritually. And you can know that you're forgiven because like I said earlier, you're investing on God's character. He's not a hypocrite. If God is good, if he's bad, if he's evil, then there's nothing we can do. There's no point even talking about it. We're screwed. And if he's not there, then we'll never know. But if God is good, which is what I'm invested in, which I believe, which I choose to believe, then he's not a hypocrite, and you know that you're saved. You know that you're forgiven if you've forgiven others. Because he's not a hypocrite. You have that security as you go on through this life knowing that you're saved. You have invested your hope and everything you think into Jesus' promises. This is what it means when a sheep follows his shepherd. This is why Jesus said, "Why do you call me Lord, but then not do what I say?" Jesus told us to forgive others, but then there are a lot of Christians who don't forgive others. He told us to love others as ourselves, but they do not. They hoard up wealth for themselves. They could care less about their neighbors as their neighbors struggle. It's one of the things that happened when I was in Kentucky. I was definitely one of the poorest people in the country. And the neighbor down the road, he was a millionaire. I mean, he had at least, $1 million in two of his bank accounts from what my other neighbor told me. And that's not even counting any investments he has and properties and everything else. So someone said, well, that's not that much money. I don't know how much money the guy has. What I do know is he was not poor, and he was not even really, your typical average person in the country. He had more than he needed to live, that's for sure. He was in his 70s. He's not going to be here that much longer. He had more than he needed to live. This guy was so cheap, man. I'm trying to think if it's worth telling this story. Yeah, I guess it is. I know I've gone off subject here. That's okay. This is a different subject. This is about, I guess I'm talking about the love of money and the things that keep people from heaven. So there was this dog that he had tied to this tree out there. It was a stray. He tied it to a tree with this rope. Anyway, I saw it. Eventually, I got in touch with the Humane Society, and we were going to try to get this dog a home. And it was a lot of effort. This dog did not want to go. And it was a lot of effort getting this dog into this lady's truck. She came down, with the Humane Society. So her and me, we both tried to get this dog into her vehicle. And anyway, she drove from an hour away. Keep that in mind. She drove from an hour away to pick this dog up. And then she drove back. So that's 2 hours of driving, right? After she got back, this cheapskate millionaire, what he comes and tells me? Hey, you tell that lady to give me my rope back. That rope was like $1 or $2. It wasn't even like good. It was cheap rope. You tell that lady give me my rope back. He's ordering me. You tell that lady come back here, bring my rope back. I looked at him like, are you crazy? The gas driving out here alone is worth like 5 times that stupid rope. This is an example of his cheapness, so you can understand what I'm dealing with here. This is a guy who he cannot fathom anything but himself. In fact, my neighbor just told me he just went out and bought a $100,000 truck. Who buys a $100,000 truck? Seriously, I mean, a $10,000 truck would work just as good. Heck, a $5,000 or a $2,000 truck probably worked just as good. He even told his neighbor, he's like, I don't even know what half the stuff in this truck does. Well, that's brilliant. You don't even know what you paid for. He just is looking to waste money on himself. And it's wasting money on himself. He's spending on himself in a way that's wasteful, that isn't even impactful, when there are other people out there having hard times. Now, keep in mind, this is a man who claimed to be a good Christian man. He was so ripe for criticism when I said Jesus said there are no good people. He's like, I'm a good Christian man. I've been going to church for 50 years. I'm like, wow. When I was quoting him Jesus, he thought I was quoting Gandhi. He was an example to me of how churches in America have failed. How can a person who has gone to church for 50 years, Christian churches, have failed so badly? Become a little rich prick living out by himself, for himself, spending money on himself like he's a princess, unconcerned about the needs of others. I was literally just down the road going through the hardest years of my life with no income for 3.5 years. Just lost my dogs. And this guy wouldn't lift a finger to help. Not only did he actually, because of his loose dogs that were always jumping over Toby on some of those walks. I remember one day, Toby, we got back to the house and he was limping around the house the rest of the day. And then in the morning the next day, he was still limping. I ended up taking him to the dog vet. I have had no income for 3.5 years. I'm burning up the limited saved money that I had, taking him to the dog vet. They charged me $130 because, to look at him for why he's limping. But the cause was his loose dogs that were jumping all over him and me on the walks. I couldn't even walk down that road anymore for a little while until I finally had a confrontation with him where he threatened basically, well, he made an indiscriminate threat, but it was basically a threat on my life when I finally called animal control because he wouldn't control his own dogs, And I didn't tell them to take him. I just told them to give him a warning. But they had every right to take the dogs, and they were driving me crazy. And anyway, that's the same guy who tried clipping me with his car, driving down the road, me and Toby. The one who threatened me on camera said, "Boy, I'll show you a crime." I said, "What?" He said, "I'll show you a crime." I'm literally pointing the camera at him, right? So this guy, the good Christian man who's been going to church for 50 years, who's a millionaire and only thinks about himself, he was everything that the Pharisees were. Love of money, love of self, proud, selective when it came to Scripture. I quoted him, Jesus, on how hard it is for a wealthy man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And he did not like it. He said, well, what I think that means is, no, there is no what you think this means is. That's the problem. That's why you're going to church for 50 years and you're not actually hearing plainly what Jesus is saying. Jesus told that wealthy prick who comes up to him, justifying himself, calling himself righteous, basically, belittling Jesus, saying, good teacher, I've kept the law my whole life. What else do I got to do to inherit eternal life? He's basically saying, am I good? Am I good? And Jesus says, no, you lack something. He was lacking empathy, basically. He said, liquidate your wealth, sell your wealth, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. And the rich man would not do it because when God commanded him to let go of his wealth, he would not let it go. He loved money more than God. And Jesus literally then says that after the man goes away, and after he says how hard it is for a wealthy man to enter heaven. It's easy for a camel to go through an eye size of a needle. The whole eye size of a needle than for a wealthy man to enter heaven. And he said, you can only have one master. You'll eventually betray one for the other. You cannot serve both God and money. This is a love of money. This is greed. This is the unrepentance of a lifestyle of sin. That's what I said earlier about how everyone has to forgive and everyone has to repent from their lifestyle of sin. Whether it's a lifestyle of sexual immorality, whether it's like sex work, where you make your income from sexual immorality, or whether it's a lifestyle of greed and living only for yourself. It's different if you don't have enough. Most people this doesn't even apply to. This is like a 1 in 20 exception. 19 out of 20 people who are listening to this are probably a lot more than that. This doesn't even apply to the whole greed thing. You have as much resources as you don't have enough. You couldn't survive probably a year or two on your own. But this guy that I'm dealing with out here, he had enough to survive off over like 10,000 years for himself. He had more than enough. That's what I'm talking about. He'd won. He won the game, the little number money game. He already won that game, and he had extra, he had excess. He could be doing good things with this, but he's not, because he does not have the love of others in his heart. He does not have the love of God in his heart. He has the love of himself. He has pride. He has the love of money. You cannot serve both God and money. And so this is why I also talked many times about how churches do not teach the repentance of sin, because a lot of the times the people who lead these churches have a love for money in their hearts. This is why they don't teach repentance. It's a conflict of interest. They're not going to. Now they'll talk about something else. They'll beat someone over the head for some pitiful thing that they're doing, but they themselves don't want to look at themselves for the greed they have in their own hearts. This is why I have trouble with a lot of churches in America. You can always tell a church just by how its pastor lives and how closely of an example that person lives towards Jesus' example that Jesus set. If this person lives better than the average person in that church, it's bad. if they drive a better car, live in a better house, this is a parasite. Yeah, don't get me wrong, there are some nice guys, some nice people, but they are parasites. They're a nice parasite, and they're not following Jesus' example. How can you listen to anything they say if they themselves do not live in Jesus' example? I want to, just so you can understand my position, I lived in a trailer out in the woods for 11 years, just me and my dogs. I had usually anywhere from $500 to maybe $500 to $1,000 in my bank account the great majority of the time I was out there. Okay? I usually never made more than $8 to $10 an hour my whole life. I've been under the poverty limit. So this guy's a loser. I have devoted myself to understanding God, to studying Scripture, to studying history. Okay, my priorities are not money. All I care about is heaven. What I'm saying here is this is an example of somebody that should be leading churches, not these people that got $27 million homes or even multi-million dollar homes and big fancy vehicles. If you want to be first, you got to be last. How embarrassing, how awkward is it? I couldn't imagine standing in front of a room full of people that you know you are taking resources from, knowing that you are living better than these people, and they're your flock, and you're fleecing them. It's disgusting. This is why I can't stand most churches in America. It's disgusting. I think people know on an instinctive level that these people are fakes. They're thieves. They don't live by Jesus' example. They know that. They know that Jesus wasn't a capitalist. They know that Jesus wasn't a rich prick. They know this. We all know this on some deep level. And so when we see this kind of person, we see an imposter, even if we don't know it. I think a lot of people know it subconsciously. So, yeah, this man was going to church for 50 years. I'm sure that these are some really messed up churches. He could even be going to some decent churches. The problem was his filter was he was only wanting to hear things that justifies his own life. He did not want to leave a life of sin. He didn't want to. And how boring would it be to be stuck in this world forever? That would be one of the worst sentences. That would be hell. That would be hell, man. You want to talk about great weeping and gnashing of teeth? Knowing that you got to stay in this world for the rest of ever, while others got to go to heaven. Because Jesus talks about that. All I care about is heaven. That's it. I won't let anything stand in the way. It's prudent to manage your resources well so that you have a nice, you know how you're paying your bills this month, how you're paying. I'm not talking about being like one of these dang hippies that doesn't plan anything about money and doesn't save anything for a hard time or for the future. But I'm talking about people who have gone well above and beyond that. People who have got more. They've got it made. They're done. Like they won the game. They've got enough to live off the rest of their life. But now they don't want to let go any extra. It's pitiful. It's dragon sickness, that's what it is. Won't part with a single coin, right? Like from The Hobbit. In heaven there are no proud spirits, because all of this love of money is pride. Thinking so high of yourself that you're trying to decorate yourself as some prince of the air. What did Jesus say? That Solomon and all of his splendor were uglier to God than the flowers in the field. That's another way of saying, he said that the flowers in the field were more beautiful to God than Solomon and all of his splendor. He said it in a way that was cleverly not sounding like he was condemning Solomon for his wealth, but he was. That Solomon and all of his splendor was uglier to God than the flowers, than to just, vegetation. That God thinks higher of flowers than all of that wealth, all of that splendor. Meaning, we humans value these things, but God, what's the saying? God does not value what humans do, and humans do not value what God does. Our values are different. And that's another reason why I lived the life I did. I valued just my time out in the woods with my dogs. That was the best time of my life. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. I was. I'm so glad I did not follow money. I'm so glad I did not pursue money. I have no regret. I'm telling you right now, that's the other thing too. I have zero regret. If I were to pass today, I would have no regrets. But that millionaire living out in the woods, that good Christian man, let me tell you something. All that leftover resources, it's going to be a weight around his neck. After I left Kentucky, I had some cash left. I seemed to plan it pretty on the money. Like I didn't have a whole lot left, but the extra that I had left, once Toby was gone, I felt guilty about it. I thought, what could I have done with that money? Now, it was planned pretty close, so it wasn't like a great excessive amount, which I would have felt really guilty about, but extra money, you're going to feel guilty about it. For people who belong to heaven, when you come to the end of your life, you're going to feel guilty about extra money because you're going to think that was wasted. I could have done. And when I say I don't mean for selfish pursuits. Oh gosh, that's the other thing I'm so tired of, man. I'm thinking like, I think of all people. I think differently. I think for most people. Most people, they think they're like literally like little dumb ants on a path that only think about themselves, and that's it. Their own little sensations, their own little experience. That's it. They are like ants to be drowned. They are pathetic. They do not think about anything beyond themselves. Believe anything beyond themselves. I mean, they are literally little ants on a path. It's annoying. But when I say things that money could have gone towards, I'm talking about anything. I'm talking about helping people who don't have money at the dog vet to help pay for their bills. I'm talking about helping with some of the homeless people in town. I'm talking about how that money could have done something before I left this earth. And I'm telling you, the more money you have when you leave this world, the more regret there will be. Ideally, you leave the world with, you came into the world with nothing and you leave the world with nothing. That's, I think, the most ideal way to go. You've got no baggage going on to that flight. You don't get to take it with you anyway, but you will take regret. I'll tell you that. Because there was a time when I thought, I thought about taking Toby on a little boat trip around the lake out there in the fall. Now at the time I thought, no. I thought he can make it at least another year, And if I hadn't dealt with all those dog vets, he probably would have made it one more fall. That's the sad truth about it. If I hadn't become a subject of fear, and if I just ignored what that first dog vet said, who was totally wrong about him having spleen cancer, he probably would have made it for a little while longer, probably till the next. But anyway, that's speculation beside the point. I regret that I didn't just take Toby on a little boat trip around the lake. That was our last fall together, and I didn't do it. So now what good is that? I think it was like $120 to do that. Someone originally told me it was like $40 or $50, and so I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. That's a good price, just for rent a little fish boat for 6 hours. But it turns out it was like $120. I was like, I can't. I shouldn't be spending $120 for, But now I look back on that, and I think, man, I should have done that. And that's just a selfish thing, but I'm just saying that there are lots of things, both selfish and selfless, that you're going to think, man, I wasted that money. I hoarded. I thought I was going to live forever. And this reminds me of the parable that Jesus gave, talking about the wealthy man who stored up wealth for himself. And death is going to come knock on his door that night like a thief and demand his life that night. And he's going to say, you fool, who's going to benefit from this money now, basically? You stored it up all for yourself, and now you don't even get to use it because now your life's being demanded from you. And what Jesus is basically saying there is death comes when you don't expect it. And most people always think they're going to live longer than they actually do. That's a common thing. When most people pass, they always thought they were going to live longer. It's very rare to find somebody who, when they pass, they think, yep, this is exactly when I was supposed to go. Most people always thought they were going to live longer, so they are surprised when the thief comes to take their life. So they have built up all this money, like all these dumb ants in our society. They accumulate all this money. And I'm sorry, look, there are basically no wealthy people in heaven. There are no proud spirits in heaven. There are no unforgiving spirits in heaven. There are no wealthy pricks in heaven. They are a cancer to a society. They are selfish. They have a love of money. They made their vote. They voted. They said, look, I want this world more than heaven. And they voted with their checkbook. Oh, nobody uses check anymore. They voted with their bank account. Here we go. It's like all these young people listening. What's a check? Yeah. You vote with your actions. You know that? Your priorities are usually seen through your who you are and what's on the outside. It's through your actions. That's where you're making your votes. You can debate things and contemplate things and so on, but the bottom line is, what do you do? Yeah, and I am kind of speaking to myself right now too, because you go through different stages in life, and that time when I was in Kentucky, I was probably the poorest in my life, and it's a little different now. And now circumstances are different, but I am thinking about what I'm saying here, and I think I do need to be careful. I do need to be careful. I'm so used to having to be so frugal and so careful with how I spent money that I need to be now careful that I'm not so frugal, that I'm not so selfish, or else I'll become just like that good old Christian man who's been going to church for 50 years. My greatest fear is to become just like him. That's how I know I've failed in life. Yep. That's how I know. He is everything I do not want to be. That guy that I met. It was a really important lesson. Sometimes you'll come across something like that that is an anti-goal, right? An anti-goal. The very opposite of who you want to be. Just be the opposite of that person in every way. If he went left, you go right. If he went right, you go left. Okay. What does that mean, too? I know I started talking about forgiveness, but we're just doing a whole sermon today. I got it in me, okay? What the love of money, like what is that? And part of it is normal and natural to want to like store up enough food for winter. You know, animals do that everywhere. The alternative is you're going to die of starvation because you didn't store up enough. It was irresponsible. You didn't store up enough for winter when it wasn't easy to get food. And so then now what are you going to do? And so on one hand, it is the prudent thing to do to make sure you don't die, to make sure you don't starve, to make sure you don't run out before your life. But it's at the same time, okay, let me simplify this then. Ask yourself how much does it cost for you to live every month? How much does it cost for you to live every year? That guy, that millionaire out in the woods, that was a clear example of a guy who he's never going to use that $1 million in his bank account. He never will. His house is paid off. He's got other properties. He's collecting Social Security. He's collecting rent. He's 71 or 75 or something like that. The guy's got multiple income sources with no expenses. He doesn't even need that million. That million is literally that's why he went out and bought a $100,000 truck. Because he knows he doesn't even need the money. His income every month, he doesn't even come close to. So this is an example of a cancerous tumor who has collected resources from the body around it, who contributes nothing too, by the way. That's another thing that I can't stand about the wealthy. They're the biggest moochers of society. They contribute nothing to society. Other people work, like his rentals. It's basically slavery. Someone else works, and then they give him the fruit of their labor just so they're not homeless. And so he's basically like a slave owner. He does nothing all day. Other people work for him, and they don't get to have anything on their own. But he has all of their things that they live in and so on. Waste money on $100,000 trucks and sort of thing. Yeah, they're parasites. I got no love for the wealthy, I'll tell you that. None. Can't stand them. This is the reason why there's so much dang suffering in this world, too. And we've never had a system that actually corrects this. And that's what's unfortunate and that's what's frustrating. But hey, that's why the world is so miserable, because people don't want to get rid of their love of money, and people are just too afraid to be average. Their pride, again, won't allow them to be average. They see themselves as better. You know, I thought that was amazing. Almost everybody I've come across, not everyone, but most people I've come across, they all think that they're smarter than the average person. I'm like, statistically, you are probably as smart as the average person, because statistically, the odds are you are average, you know? But everybody always thinks that somehow they're smarter, and that's how you know we live in a society of pride. A society of pride. You also know that if you're smarter, you know the more you've been given, the more is expected of you. So that's not also really very smart to be going around talking about how great you are, because then more is expected from you. You know? As I said, if you know your IQ, you should keep that, and it's higher than average, you should keep that to yourself. Because then people are going to expect amazing things from you. You're like, you're that high IQ and you haven't done anything with your life? What a loser. You know, but if the guy's like 80 IQ, you're like, well, I mean, he did good for himself. 80 IQ guy, that guy did well, you know? So I was just saying, if you think you're so highly of yourself, then maybe you should keep that to yourself, because the standards are higher, you know? But there's just a lot of pride in this society. I got to say that. Everybody seems to think that they're better than everyone else. And that's why they feel entitled to having a better car than average, better house than average. They just want to look better than everyone. So it's parallel to how they feel. They want to feel better than everyone. We live in a world where people can't just be average. And this is so ridiculous, because they need to get a hobby. I'm serious, something else, because they just need a hobby. They need something else to take their mind off of playing this silly life game that they're playing, where their bank account is like their points. It's vanity. It's meaningless. And it's a weight around your neck. And it's also going to be used in the court against you after this life is over. What you have not done for the least of these brothers of mine, you have not done for me, is what the judge is going to say. And this good Christian man of 50 years is going to say, but when did I ever see you, Lord, needing food or needing anything? Is like, and he's going to point to every single homeless person he drove past. He's going to point to every single person in his life, the guy down the road like me, who had nothing, was going through very hard times, wouldn't lift a finger to help. Every single person that man has come across, he's going to realize, oh, shoot, wow, God was in these people. They were his people. And I did not feed them. I did not clothe them. I did not help them. Sometimes indifferent inaction is just as bad as beating a lion cub. It's no different than if you were in this room and you watched that lion cub have no food and no water and starve over a number of days, and you had access to food and water, but you chose to not give that lion cub food and water. What do you think the lion is going to do to you when that barrier lifts? And they saw what you had and who needed help. Now, I know a lot of you are probably not comfortable with what I'm saying, and I'm sorry, but this needs to be talked about. It's uncomfortable for me too, because it's all very vague in terms. We need like just a set number. If you've got more than this, it's wrong, right? And if you've got less than this, it's okay. So I'm going to be generous here and say, this is going to be difficult. If you've got less than $50,000, you're okay, considering how much it costs every year to live out in this country. You know what I mean? That's not, 50,000 won't get you very far in life. So I'm just going to get just a set number. So immediately those people who are in that group where they've got something under there, they're thinking, is this guy thinking that I'm a selfish prick? Or not this guy, but is God thinking I'm a selfish prick? This is why I said it's very hard. People like definitive numbers. This is why I said with the law suggestions that I put in the last recording that I uploaded, we need an asset limit of $1 million per person in society. This is not just so that society functions smoother, is more stable, there's no more lack, no more suffering. in terms of like financial lack or hunger or homelessness or anything like that. Not only does it solve those problems, not only does it solve political corruption, since you can't really bribe anybody anymore, and it makes everybody average, and everybody's so scared to be average because their dang pride wants to be better than everyone else. That's the real problem here. But also an asset limit would also cause people to no longer have to feel this sense of guilt from knowing they have more than the average person who struggles. Knowing that the system itself is now trying to work this out, so they are not responsible anymore for having to find, they've been given a reasonable amount, $1 million max limit. Anything over that you have to donate or you go to jail. So you're allowed to have up to $1 million worth of stuff. Anything more you have to donate or you go to jail. So you have an incentive legally to not be a prick. Which is why I just said I just want to throw a number out there. $50,000. If you've got less than that, which is most people, I'm not talking about you. I'm mostly talking about billionaires, to be fair. People who have vast wealth, who can greatly affect the world. The more you have, the more it's going to be held against you. Let me put it that way. So, I didn't want somebody out there who's got like $8,000 in the bank account to think, he thinks I'm loaded. God's going to send me to hell because of my $8,000. Are you kidding me? There are people out there that make like 10 times that every month. Are you kidding me? No, I just wanted to throw a number out there just so people just have an idea. I think $1 million is a fine limit. I do. It's nobody needs more than 2 houses. They really don't need more than 1 house. I'm just being generous. A $1 million limit, $500,000, two $400,000 houses is a reasonable limit. But once you've gone to the point of like billionaire, yeah, you're in a whole other category where you've got well more than you'll ever need, and you are now consciously choosing not to feed that lion cub, and the lion can see that you could have. And that is another thing I do want to say, that we have systems in our world now that we live in that can help take care of people. And I wish they could do better. We still have lots of homelessness. I say still, like we've even begun to deal with the problem. We haven't. We haven't even begun to deal with the problem of homelessness. Why does this matter? Because it matters to God. I'm telling you, okay, I want to talk about this. Yeah, before I left Kentucky, I would walk around in the park with Toby out there behind the library. It's one of my favorite places to take him on a walk. And every now and then there'd be some homeless people out there. And I just remember God saying, look at what they've done to my people. You understand that amongst homeless people, that a number of these people belong to God. Jesus said, what you have not done for the least of these brothers of mine, you have not done for me. You may not be homeless, so you think, well, I'm set. I don't have to worry about it. It depends. If you have lots of resources, you do, though. And this is why it should be no Christian's ambition to have lots of resources, because you're just aspiring to have to be making up for what, food stamps or what your city is not doing, basically. What the local food bank is not doing. If you're a Christian and you have got resources, or you aspire to have resources, it should only be for the purpose of helping like this. Otherwise, it's a vanity. Yeah, Jesus was always condemning the rich. Woe to you who are rich. The comforts you've received now are the only comforts you're ever going to get. But blessed are you who are the poor, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to you. He was always condemning the rich. Now, Paul was not. Paul was always friends with the rich and telling the poor to just go along with it. Get along with it. If you're a slave, suck it up, even though he's not a slave. Well, that's some serious hypocrisy, right? He's never been a slave, but he tells slaves, I'll just deal with it. Jesus, on the other hand, had a very different perspective. I'm so glad Jesus was the Messiah, not Paul. And he was always condemning the rich. And he was taking resources from donations and giving it to the poor, because Judas even brings this up when that woman wanted to spend a nice perfume on Jesus not long before he was taken. And, we can see just through his own words, Judas's words, that, they would take donation money and give it to those that needed it the most. And that's why the early church they were called communes. That's where we get the word communism, because they survived in a way where they gathered resources, they made sure everybody's needs were taken care of, and that's how they survived. Where do you think they got that from? They got that from Jesus. Jesus was a communist. He was not a capitalist. He was condemning capitalists. He was condemning... Capitalism is moneyism. It's the love of money. And I'm so sick and tired of in America how they talk about Jesus was a capitalist. He was a blue-eyed, European-looking capitalist. No, he wasn't. He was a Jewish man. Most likely had brown eyes. Some people say he had green. I don't know where that rumor comes from, but most likely brown eyes. That's what Jewish people usually have. Of average height, of average looks. It's talked about in Isaiah that he was nothing remarkable, nothing noteworthy. He was not attractive. He was not tall and dark and handsome. He was probably of average height. He was probably 5'8", of average looks, with brown eyes, Jewish man, an average-looking man. There was nothing remarkable about him. It goes. Otherwise, he would have came into the world as a rich king. Instead, he came into a manger. There was nothing remarkable about him. You see what I'm saying? And that's why you can see what was remarkable about him stand out so well, because there was nothing visibly remarkable about him. If he had great looks and great stature and was born into a rich family, then again, you could expect much more of him. But for a peasant to be remembered in history more than the emperor of his empire at that time is how we know his resurrection most likely happened. If he was just a good moral teacher, he would have been forgotten in time. Nobody would have mentioned him. Nobody would have cared. Nobody would have gone to the cross for him, let alone hundreds of Christian families. No Jews would have converted over to a different, belief system, which was Christianity, had he not risen from the dead. The fact that he was so unremarkable in his circumstances and in his appearance is what made his spirit so apparently remarkable. And they were communists. They were. I don't want to spend too long on this because we've been programmed for the last 60 years to think that communism is evil. What we saw was Bolshevism, it's not communism. The world never actually saw real communism except for the early church. That was the only time where we saw real communism, and it worked. Unfortunately, we've seen these ridiculous charades of communism. If you have anyone in a country that calls itself communist as rich, they're not communists. There are no rich people in a communist society. There are no poor people. There are no rich people. It's all in a very giant bulk of very similar range. But there are no poor and there are no rich in a communist society. So every one of these Bolshevik societies that showed up in the last century, they were not communists. The leaders were hypocrites. They were just replacing royalty with themselves. It wasn't real communism. I'm also convinced that the world's wealthiest people have been making it a very high priority to make the idea of communism look so distasteful to the world by keeping countries like North Korea around, so that it's like the boogeyman of communism, so people can say, oh, see, if you want to be communist, you're going to be like them. You're going to be just like North Korea. They keep them around, I think, to scare people away from the idea of communism. To get people to think that that's what communism is. Okay, that's called fascism, what you're looking at countries like that. Like in Russia, Stalin's Russia, or North Korea. It's a dictatorship, and that's... Anyway. Communism is the idea of making sure is shared resources, making sure need is taken care of. Communityism. Making sure nobody in the community is dying. Nobody in the community is suffering. Nobody in the community is homeless. Nobody in the community is hungry. This is a much more noble goal than capitalism, the worship of money, moneyism. Try to accumulate as much as you can to take everything from everyone else in the world. Like it's some freaking game. That will lead to a couple people owning everything and everyone else owning nothing, you idiots. And I'm saying that, you idiots. And if you're not a billionaire, guess what? You're in the losing side. You should probably switch teams, and you should probably stop supporting the very system that will keep you a cog in the machine. A friend of mine, I remember once he's very pro-capitalist. He was telling me that he's against communism because he doesn't want to be a cog in the machine. What do you think? He said he wants to have his. He doesn't want people telling him like, what career to do. And I was saying that has nothing to do with communism. That's just how they organize their government. But communism is just economic. That's all it is. But all the other stuff was just bullshit. But anyway, he was saying he didn't want to be a cog in the machine. I thought, and after that conversation, I thought, but my whole life I've been a cog in this capitalist machine, and everybody I've known, they just took the first job they can get to pay their bills, and they just usually stay with it. What was it? 90% of people in America hate their jobs. Everybody's a cog in the machine. So I don't know. To be fair, he's 18. So what I'm saying is he hasn't been a cog in the machine for a long period of time to realize that he's fantasizing about capitalism. But capitalism's had 200 years to prove itself, and it has shown it has failed. It gets worse every decade. When you have all the money in the world, you can buy political power. You can buy, look at like Microsoft. I don't mean to be going on a subject here, but I think it's kind of necessary. Look at Microsoft. It was clearly a monopoly, and yet it was not broken up like the government was supposed to do. And that's how you know we're under crony capitalism, because it's not even real capitalism. But what I'm saying is that real communism is still better than real capitalism. But we're living under crony capitalism, and we've seen crony communism across the sea. It's sad. It is sad. But the problem with capitalism, moneyism, the worship of money, not only is it very much against the very heart of Jesus' message, there is no Christian that should be a capitalist, period. Anybody who has studied Jesus and who has studied the early church, they have no excuse. They should not be moneyists, capitalists. The idea thinking that, listen, you might technically be able to do evil things to people. You might technically be able and allowed to own lots of resources, but you will be held accountable and you will be condemned by it. Which makes me wonder, if we went to an actual communist system like the early church, would it simply just conceal the greed that's in the hearts of people? So like Jesus said that, if you've already committed murder in your heart, in God's eyes, you've already committed murder. And so we have laws against murder in our society. And so not that many people murder, but lots of people murder in their hearts, and God can see that. I guess it'd be in the same category. It's fine. It would just it would make for a less painful world, but you're going to have still a lot of people who are still greedy at nature. They're still going to hate the very system they live under because they just can't be average. Their pride. See, this is why I don't have a problem with dealing with a system like this, because I eliminated my pride a long time ago. It's a vanity. And I don't have a problem with being average. Actually, it'd probably be an upgrade. Someone say that's probably the conflict of interest. This guy's lived in poverty his whole life. If we go to communism, he'll live better. Well, John the Baptist was a homeless man. Jesus also describes being homeless, as he said, foxes have dens, but even the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. So it's different. My ambitions to, like I said, I've had different ambitions. I've just never made money a priority. Anyway, I don't want to get off on this episode, but Jesus said to pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. The example that Jesus led was to take resources and to give it to those who need it the most. This was the example that he gave. This is what he taught. And so I am just following in his example and saying that as a Christian, you should not have a love of money. You should not be a capitalist. You should be very much for systems that take care of lack and suffering. And I'm so sick and tired of watching people who call themselves Christians but also call themselves capitalists. You have got to make up your mind. You cannot have two masters. You can't serve both God and money. And they'll like to argue that, no, this is about freedom. This is always like this weird, like, what in the hell are you talking about, man? The freedom to enslave your neighbor, right? Is that what you're talking about? To own everything so everyone has nothing? And they always say this. They always say that when they own everything, they're going to be generous. It's always they're going to be the benevolent. They're going to give back. Why don't you give back now? You can do that now. Did you know that? You don't have to wait till you're a billionaire before you become generous. You could be generous right now with what you got. You just don't have to give as much, but you can still be generous right now. Prove to me that you could be generous now with what you got before you start trying. This is called the path to hell is usually paved in good intentions. They think they're tricking themselves is what they're doing. There are some people in like the Christian world that they like to think that I'm going to become a billionaire for a good cause. I'm going to do good. Well, not just the Christian community, but just a lot of people in general. This is how they trick themselves into trying to take a great amount of wealth. Money is labor. So let's stop using the word. I'm going to see if I can do this for the rest of this recording. Stop using the word wealth and start using the word labor. To take a great amount of labor from the world. Okay, people labored and they gave their labor to this person. Okay, a great labor from the world, only to then use it for good things. That's what they have fooled themselves into thinking. That's why they're going to have taken so much labor from people. Yeah. It's their pride that they're actually serving, because they've shown no generosity up to that point. They're waiting until they can do a lot with it. Please. They're not going to do anything. They're going to get to that point and have the dragon sickness. They're not going to let go of a single coin. They're going to feel like they earned it. But how hard it is for a wealthy man to enter the kingdom of heaven after Jesus just got done telling the wealthy man to sell his wealth and give it to the poor and then come and follow him. But the man would not do it. And Jesus basically condemns him indirectly by saying, you can only have one master. You cannot serve both God and money. If you're not willing to part with a little bit of money, you're not willing to part with all of it. That's another thing that I've also learned from my life experience, is that there are some people who they're not necessarily wealthy that I've come across, but they've got a decent amount. And I have seen that they were willing to part with some of their money for a very good cause. And so that tells me that they're very likely, like you see, Jesus can order anybody to just sell all of what they have, half of what they have, part of what they have. He can do this. And if the person won't do it, if they won't let go of a little, they won't let go of all of it. They have more love for their money than for their God. Well, their God is money. I mean, they have more love for their money than who they profess as Lord. Jesus said, many people will come to me on judgment calling me Lord, Lord. Did I not teach in your name? Did I not? So there's a lot of people out there who call Jesus their Lord. But like he says, what good is it to call me Lord, but then not do what I say? To not follow his example, to not forgive others, to not care about the needs of others, to not love others as yourself. This is what it means to be what it actually means to be a Christian. This is what it's supposed to mean to be a Christian. Unfortunately, what we have seen as the definition of Christian is terrible. Like I said, they follow the blue-eyed European capitalist Jesus. That's who they follow. Their idol. It's sad. You know, on a somewhat related note, having had to say goodbye to Toby 6 months ago, the last of my dogs. Now I'm left in this world. It's just me. It's just me in a house. And to me, money is so valueless to me now. It's so valueless. I personally don't want to be here longer than I have to. I'm interested to see what happens in the world. I'm interested to see how this freak show plays out, with world government and just I am kind of like it's a TV show that I'm in the middle of, like a series like Stranger Things or Game of Thrones or some show like that. I feel like we're in a big show and we get to see it unfold, and I'm kind of curious to see how this goes. But I really, if I could just go now and have permission to leave, I would. I've struggled with the idea of offing myself over my life a number of times after my mom's passing. I know this is a different subject. I'm getting to a point, I think at some point. What I'm trying to say here is I don't love being here. And there were times where I did, like when all of my dogs were here, and Team Fortress 2 just came out. There were some good times. There were some good years, you know. But I've seen mostly sadness and emptiness, and it's just unfortunately what this world leans towards. My heart was made for heaven. You could have some nice moments in this life, but I'm telling you, nothing compares to heaven. And that's what I lean towards. And now I know the remainder of my time here, I'm here as a servant. I'm no longer here for myself, which is another reason why I said any money that I have now is just, it's for a purpose. It's for sustaining me while I'm here, for the time that I'm here. It's for a purpose. It's not for vanity. It's not for luxury. It's not for comfort. It's not for pride. None of that. It's not to say that there aren't valuable things that can come from this life. Treasure in heaven is made here, for example. But everything that we've been taught to pursue in this world is just not, it has no value like the world teaches us. It's a dead end. It reminds me of when I was in middle school. They had these programs to like sell their cookies and sell their stuff for them, and then they had like these prize incentives. You get these little fur ball things, I remember, and if you got so many sales, you get a limo ride. I'm like, they're literally at a young age trying to indoctrinate children with the wastefulness of capitalism. And as a kid, even as a kid, I thought, why would I want a limo ride? You know, I like playing computer games. If a faster computer would be way more important to me than a limo ride. But yeah, they were trying to get kids at a young age to be incentivized by being a slave to them, selling their products to other people so that they could have vanities like limo rides. From a young age, we are bombarded by this stuff. Now, I don't know if they do that in schools anymore. I would hope they don't. But that was just a shameful, easy example of capitalism being pushed onto us at a young age. Moneyism, the love of things and vanity. Oh, you worked hard. You get a limo ride. You're better than other people now because you were a good little slave, a good little minion. You did everything you were told, so we're going to reward you with a little treat. But that other dog over there, he's a lazy dog. He's a bad dog. He doesn't get treats. He's a loser. That's how the evil world talks. Through pride. Tell you this, a lot of those people that these rich pricks have called losers belong to God. How do you think they're going to feel when that barrier comes up and that lion is seen on the other side? And they withheld so much of that food and so much of the resources that was meant for his people. How do you think they're going to feel? They even used their own life as an example of what would be a fair judgment. Jesus said this, the measure you use will be used against you. So, for example, they had great power, they had great wealth, they had the ability, and I'm talking now mostly about billionaires, they had the ability to affect lots of people's lives, to build them a home, to live with dignity. They had the ability to do this. They chose not to. They chose to hoard it. They chose not to. They chose to take the labor from everyone that they took, because money is labor. They have lots of money, therefore they have lots of labor taken from the system. They took all this labor from society, but they do nothing constructive with it. They don't help anyone with it. So why would God, who is even more powerful than them, lift a finger to help them if they wouldn't lift a finger to help someone else? The story of Lazarus comes to mind, the parable that Jesus gives, talking about the poor man who waited for scraps of food outside the rich man's house. And the dogs who also waited for the food licked his sores. And he talks about how the rich man goes to hell. It's funny how Jesus doesn't even explain why. He just, nope, straight to hell. The rich guy, straight to hell. And when the rich guy is in hell, everything that the rich man feels is what the poor man experienced. He's so thirsty. He's so hungry. Everything that the poor man that was within his world that he could have affected, that rich man has to feel. What did I say? From what I experienced as a young person, what you have done to others will be done to you. How God feels about you is your place in heaven. He can make everyone and will make everyone feel the way He wants them to feel. That is perfectly fair. That rich man ignored that poor man's pains, and so that rich man's sentence is to feel that poor man's pains for all of eternity. Now the poor man was loved by God and was taken to heaven, but the rich man suffers. He suffers everything that poor man went through. Jesus talked about this. So if you aspire to be rich, it's like you're aspiring to go to hell. You should have no aspirations to be rich if you are a Christian. If you're not, go be a prick. Go be a prick. You're going to, what's the saying? Fuck around and find out. You're going to find out. You're going to fuck around in this world and you're going to find out. FAFO. For all those people who think that they're going to have their cake and eat too, who think they're going to live against Jesus' example, who are going to make their master money, somehow try to do a deathbed repentance or sneak their way into heaven or trick God somehow. Or you have only fooled yourselves. You've chosen money, you've chosen hell. You've chosen wrong. You chose poorly, as they say in Indiana Jones. He chose poorly. Yes. That's a great scene too, by the way. The last Indiana Jones with the Crusader, and they got a drink from the Holy Grail, or the cup, and the other guy chooses this golden cup. Well, he doesn't choose it, but the lady who wants him gone chooses it. But then Harrison Ford's character, Indiana Jones, he chooses a more modest cup, more believable, most likely, what Jesus probably would have drank from, not something golden and fancy, and so then he lives. So anyway, I guess it's kind of on subject, right? People who have God's Spirit are convicted when they do when they do wrong, when they're in the wrong, when something is wrong, they feel uncomfortable. Now, people who do not have God's Spirit, they don't feel this at all. They have no warning system. They are blind. The good news is, if you feel convicted by a lot of what I've talked about, the good news is that there is something inside of you that is working to refine you. That's good news. Whether you obey it or not is a different subject, but the good news is at least there is something at work inside of you. So let me put this as the third thing. For conditions to go to heaven. One, what we started with, you have to forgive others. Jesus said that. Two, no pride. Jesus didn't teach that, but it was implied through many of his lessons. I'm just going to put it there. It's the one common thing that I found amongst those who are, in quotes, saved and those who are not. Those who are saved have dropped their pride. Pride is not dominating them, ruling them. They have dropped their pride. That's the second one. And the third one is to have a relationship with God, which should convict a person to act out of love and have a sense of empathy. Jesus said to that wealthy man asked, is there anything else I got to do? And he could not see the crowd of poor and struggling people all around him, as I'm sure he walked through with nice clothes and perfume and had all of his meals. And he is so blind, and he's asking Jesus, is there anything else? Like, he just got done bragging about how righteous he was and how he's kept the law since he was a kid. And we know that's a lie. We know he's not a perfect person. We know he's not without sin. We know right there he's lying right there, right off the bat. So there's that. There's that as a separate issue. But even if what he's saying is true, the thing is he still lacks empathy. And this is actually, and Jesus didn't even try to argue with him and saying, oh, so you've never done this, you've never done. He didn't even try. He's like, hey, great. But you lack something very obvious, which was empathy. He is surrounded by people in need, and he cares only about himself. This is very concerning. This is something that separates us from the animals. I know that God loves many animals. There are many animals in heaven. But this is something that we are now more capable of than the animals, which is greater awareness of our surroundings and empathy to guide our choices. We are expected to be obedient to empathy, and to turn a hard heart and deaf ear to empathy is literally to disobey God. It is the spirit of empathy that is the Spirit of God. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is the spirit behind life. What you've done to the least of these brothers of mine, you've done to me. His people are his body. He is his people. I think this falls into the category of it's not like a salvation level issue. It's more people can just be lazy or cold at times in their life. And they're not good at obeying God in their heart. Meaning, I believe that a person can go through periods in their life where they lack empathy, but they are forgiven. Meaning that I wouldn't put this in the category of needed for salvation, as forgiveness is needed and as having a relationship with God is needed. This is just, are you an effective disciple or not? Because if you're living against empathy, how can we tell the difference between you and the world? I mean, if you're out pursuing things of the world that the world seeks after, it paints a really bad picture. Now, only God knows the hearts and minds of each of his people, but what I'm saying is, from an outside perspective, it's pretty dang bad. I don't think that anybody who was living in that lifestyle would feel right, or they shouldn't feel right, to call themselves a disciple of Jesus if they are not living in his example. I guess what I'm trying to say to everybody is make up your mind. And what you're choosing to make your mind up on, live it. There's a lot of people that say they think this and say they think that, but they don't do. You know, if you want to be a materialistic atheist, then be the best materialistic atheist you can be. Own everything. Put everybody homeless on the street. Be that prick you were meant to be. Go do that. Go to hell. That's where you belong. That's what you are. That's what you want to be. Make up your mind. But Christians, stop being that prick. Stop being in the middle. Stop being lukewarm, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Make up your mind. Is Jesus your Lord? I've said this many times. I'll say it again. Jesus is either 100% your Lord or he is 0% your Lord. There's this no 80% or 60%. I agree with them on this, but I don't agree with them on that. No, then he's not your Lord. I don't think they understand what the position of king means. It's absolute. You defer all judgment to him. You didn't know what to think on this subject. Really, truly, since we were kids, nobody really knew anything. And you defer to Jesus on these issues that he talked about. About forgiveness, for example. I think I did a decent job at the beginning of this recording, talking about you need to forgive others. So there are no, well, I kind of agree with him on that. No, there is not. You're not. This isn't a debate. That's oh my gosh, that pride irritates me so much when I see stupid fools thinking that they're going to argue with God about how things should be or how they think it should. What they have is a God complex. They think that they are God, that they are better than God, that they are smarter than God. This is ridiculous. God is an infinite mind without cause, is beyond time, and this stupid little thing thinks it is smarter than God. This is like a character in a book trying to outsmart its own author. Good luck. These people who judge God, it's crazy. I'm talking about basic things like when Jesus told us to forgive others if you want to be forgiven. This is not up for a debate. If Jesus is your Lord, you accept that. That's it. Okay? Jesus said how hard it is for a wealthy man to enter heaven after he just got done telling the wealthy man to sell his wealth, give it to the poor, and then follow him. That he literally gave us an example of what he believes wealthy people should do. You want to call me an evil communist? I don't care. I follow my shepherd. He's Jesus. That's it. He told wealthy people to sell their wealth, give it to the poor. And I'm telling you to do the same. And you get mad at me? Get mad at Jesus, man. That's what he did with his actions. That's what he taught. We live in a delusional society of selfish people who love money, and they're going to find every way they can to justify their love of sin, their disobedience. They'll usually come up with some other scripture from some other part. I don't care about that. Let's just focus on what Jesus said and how he lived and what he did. He advised this rich man to sell his wealth, give it to the poor, and then follow him. And then he condemned the rich after the man walked away and wouldn't do it. Then he condemned the rich in his statement. What does that tell you? What I'm getting at here is Jesus your Lord? I would hope to see a great divide. I'm tired of this lukewarm gaggle of people where nobody really stands for anything. Nobody believes anything. Everybody's lukewarm. I can't stand it. What I'm saying is if you call yourself a Christian, then call Jesus your Lord 100% and do what he says. Stop listening to these other people. Pastors, Paul, Old Testament patriarchs. It doesn't matter. Look, what did Jesus say? How did Jesus live? Is he your Lord? Then follow his example. Is he your shepherd? Then be the sheep who follows that voice. You know, there was probably a time when the word Christian meant something. That poor word, has meant so many things in history, you know. It is so sad. Like if somebody calls me a Christian, that could either be a good or bad thing, you know. I don't know. It depends on who's using the word, how it's being used, you know. What I say is very against what most Christian leaders and pastors say. I'm obvious. For those just tuning in, you'd say, hey, you're not like most. Yeah. And I know, and it is scary. Sometimes it is different. It is wild. I do experience all the grief of not being mainstream, and I don't care. All of my loved ones are gone, other than, you know, maybe like my sister. All of my dogs are gone. My mom's gone. My grandma, everybody is gone, man. I am here in this world by God's request, because I don't want to be here, okay? And I'm here for a reason. And I think it was because I think the person that God made me up to this point needs to speak, needs to be heard. I've seen this world. I've seen its struggles. I've seen its mistakes. And yet it's like it doesn't correct itself because the people who are responsible for correcting it are compromised. Like a lot of these church leaders, a lot of these pastors. They've taken to bad theology and bad arguments. And the apostate Paul is responsible for a lot of that. That's a whole other subject. Go find some other recordings I put up about that. Jesus and Paul did not agree on everything. Paul never met Jesus. Paul never quoted Jesus on anything. That is a huge red flag. Paul never once quoted Jesus on anything, and there are a number of key issues where Paul subtly disagrees with Jesus. This is an example of somebody who, and this is why Christianity has suffered so much. You've got people who come along, and now I need to first confront but he experienced the Spirit in the wilderness. Yeah, just like Jesus warned us. He said after he leaves, if someone comes to you and says, I saw him out in the wilderness, to not believe him. Paul literally comes afterwards and says, I saw Jesus in the wilderness. And like, we believe him. They don't understand that deceiving spirits can, get this, deceive people. Jesus also witnessed the Spirit out in the wilderness. And guess what? It was Satan. Paul didn't know who he was dealing with when he was in the wilderness, but Jesus knew. Anyway, people have idolized Paul. Paul was a guy who never lived with Jesus, okay? Never met Jesus. Now, according to him, he met him once, so he called himself an apostle, but that was a title that Jesus gave to people by choice of the people who lived with him, who witnessed his ministry, okay? That was not something that you can just make up yourself. Look at these crazy people nowadays calling themselves apostles 2,000 years after he was here. They did not live with him. Okay? It is pride that causes people to want a title. That's why I know Paul suffered from pride. He had to have the title. Look at his big elaborate openings. His fake, I pray for you about this. And telling people about what he prays about. When Jesus warned us about the fakeness of prayer, to not let people know what you pray about. And yet here you got Paul just telling everybody what he prays about in letters, Even 2 Peter was written in his style, and he's pretending to be Peter in order to get support from people because he knows the actual apostles don't support him. So don't get me started on Paul. I can go on for hours about some of the issues with Paul. Now, I agree with some of the things that Paul says. Love is patient. Love is kind. That's one of the best verses, in my opinion. It's so sad that you have a character that is right about some things that are very important, but then completely in another direction than what Jesus taught about. Paul taught that the God of this world, you have to submit to him because it's God. But Jesus said the God of this world is the devil, the prince of the air. Out in the wilderness, the devil said that all of the kingdoms and all of its splendor has been given to him, and he can give it to whoever he wants. Meaning Satan is over all of the kingdoms and governments of this world. But Paul says that being is God. It's the devil. And Paul, I think unknowingly, was instructing people to submit to the devil. Jesus told us and revealed this to us that the God of this world is the devil. The one who's in charge of all the authorities and all that stuff. He said, give to Caesar what's Caesar and give to God what's God's. Meaning, don't give to God or don't give to Caesar anything that belongs to God. And you could probably argue, don't try to give to God what really just belongs to Caesar. Okay, so there were very, very... But the problem is that people idolized Paul, and they started going to Paul's letter. Why do you think churches teach mostly out of Paul's letters? Not Jesus. It's Paulianity. It's not Christianity. 99, and if you look at the history, this is the most killer part. When I discovered this in my 20s, it blew my eyes wide open. So Paul, in one of his own letters, talks about how the reason he wants to go make his own churches, he says he doesn't want to build on someone else's foundation. He doesn't want to build on Jesus' foundation. Jesus built his own church on Peter. Okay? That was where his church started. But Paul said he didn't want to work under them. He wanted to go do his own thing. And he said he didn't want to build on someone else's foundation, meaning on Jesus' foundation. That's not what blew my eyes wide open. What I discovered when I was looking into the history of it is that so Paul was going to all these Gentile churches on the outskirts with no real approval from the actual apostles. That's why letters like 2 Peter came up. You got Paul writing, pretending to be Peter. Peter was illiterate. He was a fisherman. He wasn't writing elaborate letters like Paul was. But anyway, it's the same writing style as Paul, but he claims to be Peter. But anyway, 99% of the churches that Paul founded became the Catholic Church, became Christianity. All of the churches like in Jerusalem and where the actual apostles were became a very small minority. They were swallowed up by all of the churches that Paul founded. They were all going to Paul for guidance. All of Paul's churches were going to Paul for guidance. He started them. They were going to him for guidance. He was not technically the first pope, but he was in actuality the first pope. Technically, it was supposed to be Peter who's considered the first pope as the head of the church, but he wasn't. It was Paul. Paul founded all these churches, and it was the Gentile churches. It was Paul's churches that consumed the other churches and became the Catholic Church. When I learned that, I realized, man, Paul became an idol. Some could even argue false prophet that misled the world through miraculous signs and so on. But bottom line is, he taught a different message than what Jesus taught, and Paul never once quoted Jesus on anything. For me, he is extracurricular writing, worth maybe reading when thinking about what was going on in the time, but he is not my Messiah. Paul is not my Messiah. Paul is not my teacher. And someone say, no, but it's the Holy Spirit. That's the thing. What Paul taught was very different from what Jesus taught, and that's how you know it wasn't the Holy Spirit. Jesus condemned the rich who owned slaves, while Paul told slaves to just suck it up. And he befriended the rich. Jesus said the God of this world is the devil. Paul said you need to submit to the God of this world. See what I'm saying? It's interesting too, because there are some strange parallels in Revelation how the false prophet tells everybody to submit to the God of this world, who speaks on behalf of the God of this world, just as Paul did, and tells everybody to submit to the God. It's very strange, the parallels, Revelation aside and interpretations aside, Paul and Jesus had different teachings, and Paul never once quoted Jesus on anything. If you are a Christian, it means Jesus is your Lord, not Paul, that you spread what Jesus taught, not Paul. This is where a lot of Christians are disagreeing with me, and I'm telling you, you are wrong in such a detrimental way that I am sad. If you cannot understand that there is only one person on the throne, and that's Jesus, then you are just wrong. And their argument is some weird, it's like, oh, but the Holy Spirit that was in Paul is the same as that was in Jesus. Then they would say the same things, wouldn't you think? They would be in agreement on everything, wouldn't you think? But they are in agreement. Jesus said that his God is only the God of the living. Paul said his God is the God of the living and the dead. I already talked about the issue about submitting to the God of this world that Paul said, submit to the devil basically, and Jesus said the God of this world is the devil. There's websites out there that outline, it's like hundreds of different points that Paul and Jesus differ on. If this is new to you, you really need to look into this. For those of you that this is not new, I'm sorry that I've taken so long telling you what you already know, but Paul was not the Messiah. Paul did not rise from the dead. Paul was not immaculately conceived. Paul was not the Messiah. How many times do I have to keep saying this until these cult followers of Paul get it through their heads? And the reason I say this is because they are the number one obstacle for Christianity reaching the world. Did you know that? Because they're spreading Paulianity. They're not spreading Christianity. They are spreading Paulianity. Paul's view on everything, Paul's take on everything. Our job was to take what Jesus taught and spread that to the world. Well, I guess you could also argue if I step back and if I take a seat. I've been recording for a while. Oh, I said I was going to keep these brief. Man, I've already been in this for hours. Well, it's a big old sermon. It's Sunday. First and second service are all bunched together with a little bit of rambling between the two. The two, first and second. What was I just saying? I'm having a Biden moment here. Oh, yeah. Another thing is you'll know them by their love is probably... It's one thing also to spread what Jesus taught, but it's another thing to spread by example. Jesus said to love your neighbor as yourself. Do you understand that by loving... You love God by loving your neighbor as yourself. If you respect your neighbor, you wouldn't commit adultery with them. You wouldn't steal from them. You wouldn't do them harm. If you respected them as yourself, you wouldn't do this to them. And so this is how they're kind of saying that, like, you'll know from an external standpoint if someone belongs to God or not based off of the fruit from their tree, based off their actions, based off their example. Faith alone is not enough. It's just an idea. It's a concept. But if the person is not committed enough to that faith, then they will have no actions that reflect their faith. And so it's obviously it's a very weak and pointless faith. Jesus, this is another thing. Paul taught that faith alone is what saves you, and that's not true. That's an absolute lie from the mouth of the devil. I'm telling you. Faith alone is not enough. Your faith, that means your salvation is then contingent on your faith. No, your salvation is contingent on God's goodness. Your salvation is contingent on God's choice. You're going to go through periods in life where you lose faith. You're going to have more faith in some time and less faith in others. And it's not contingent on your faith. And you're not saved because you did good deeds. What's being said here is that people who have been changed by God generally will start to show fruit of God, and that is the love of others, the love of your neighbor as yourself. To deal with people fairly and empathetically, to be governed by empathy. The spirit of empathy is the spirit of God, and that's what I mean when I'm saying if you're not governed by empathy, that is a giant red flag that do you even know God? Do you even know who He is? Is He leading you? Is He your Lord? If that's what I mean when I say, I didn't want to say earlier that not being, because we go through cold spells there too, where we're not very empathetic and so on. But if a person is not led in general by empathy, something is very wrong. One wonders, and I'm not saying like I know this, I'm just saying as speculation, and it would cause you, the person, to want to wonder, do you have a relationship with God if you feel no empathy for others? I'm not saying you have to prove it. What I am saying is that people who have submitted to God generally will just show this fruit. It will just become visible. It's not something that you have to consciously do. It just becomes visible. And there's different circumstances. I know. I've lived a very quiet and lonely life, secluded. Other people live in very busy lives with lots of people and so on. And so for some, we don't really have a huge opportunity to show empathy, especially if I'm on a road with a couple old guys and they're all like millionaires and I'm the poor one, like I can't. They don't need my help, But yeah, are you governed by empathy? We're not perfect. So like I said, you're not going to be perfectly governed by empathy every day of your life, but this is what we're supposed to do. Not turn a cold shoulder. Do you know how much better this world would be if everyone was governed by empathy? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable how much better this world would be if we were simply governed by empathy. If we obeyed Jesus' first and second command. First command, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Second command, he said, is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Do you know how different this world would be if people just did just this? If they were governed by just this? You wouldn't need laws if people lived under this. Think about what I just said. You wouldn't even need laws. There would be no jails. There'd be no crime. If everyone lived under this, if they lived under this standard to love your neighbor as yourself, you wouldn't need laws. And that's what I mean when I say I don't know how anybody can disagree with this very simple and profound commandment that Jesus gave. That's why Jesus said, what good is it if you call yourself, if you say you belong to me, but then you don't do what I say? It's like Christians or people who call themselves Christians, but then they disrespect their neighbor. They make their neighbor go work for them and pay rent to them and then kick them out the moment they lose their job or can't pay rent anymore, and treat their neighbor like a slave. How do you call yourself a Christian while renting, having people rent and being a slave to you? How do you call yourself a Christian and yet still have slaves? See, this is something that, again, Paul did not condemn, that Jesus was condemning, either through implication or directly. If you love your neighbor as yourself, you would not enslave. Would you? Now, I got to be careful because some parents are messed up. But for most people would not enslave their own children. Because why? Because they're your child. They'll enslave strangers, but not their own children. So what I'm saying is that we were commanded to love everyone, to love others as ourselves. You would not want to be a slave, so you should not enslave others. You would not want to be forced to pay rent with everything you've got and be break even every month. And the moment you don't have money anymore, be kicked out of your own house, be homeless. You would not want that to someone else, or you would not want that for yourself, so you shouldn't do that to someone else. There's so many Christians that live in hypocrisy and disobedience, and they've justified it. That's the worst part too. It's one thing if they're just ignorant, because they have, and nobody's really corrected them. It's because it happens. It does. Churches just don't talk about this stuff. I'm that guy. I'm that awkward uncle, right? Who's going to tell you all the truths of life, right? The parents, they're too embarrassed to talk about sex issues and that kind of stuff. So you have to go to the uncle who he just knows everything about stuff. Well, he knows not everything, but he knows what the parents know. It's just he's willing to talk about a lot more because it's awkward for the parents. And the parents are okay with that because they don't want to have the sex talk with their kids. But then the uncle's like, giving some red pill advice and stuff, men guarding their own wallet, that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of Christians who they will defend their calloused hearts. They will defend their lack of empathy. They say dumb things too. Oh, they like being homeless. Yeah? Like right now, it's like 9 degrees outside right now and snowing. It's supposed to be 0 degrees tonight. You think they like being homeless out there? You think anyone likes to be homeless in this? It's one thing if you live out on the beach. Okay, I could maybe lean more towards maybe they have something there when they say they like being homeless. But do you really think when the weather's bad, when it's either really hot or really cold, you really think they like being homeless? Or is that just you just telling yourself that so you can try to justify having a cold heart? Would you want to be caught out there in that weather? No? There are rich people out there that they've got empty houses, apartments, just buildings, empty stuff. And if they were truly guided by Jesus, they would find a way, especially during the hard weather seasons, to say, you know what? We're going to set up a temporary homeless shelter here. Once we got so many people, meaning you can only fill so many. Once you get so many people in there, once you filled up, you're good. Get them out the cold in the wintertime. Do you know how meaningful that is? Especially when you know that some of those people in that group of homeless people belong to God. And you don't know who they can be. You have to treat everybody as if though everyone belongs to God. This is what people who have money, who call themselves Christians, should be doing, but they don't. All they're concerned about is some new thing they're going to acquire. They're collectors. They only care about themselves. They go out and buy a $100,000 truck they don't even need, while other people suffer. It shouldn't be like this. Look, if people who had no faith, didn't belong to God, were just behaving like this, it's still evil. I would still condemn the actions, but at least I wouldn't be saying they're also fake Christians. They're also disobedient. They're also like the charges for a Christian who act like unbelievers is worse because they know better, or at least they're supposed to know better. And that's one of the reasons why I do these recordings, to inform Christians about what Jesus said. No excuses, no BS, just what he said and how he lived and the example he left, so they know what is right and what is wrong, because clearly their pastors have not done a very good job of exposing this, mostly because their pastors are part of the problem. This is why I made the recording about those law change suggestions back there, because I know that if we had an asset cap and a minimum and maximum wage and all of the excess resources went to take care of lack, we had a system that could actually take care of this for people, and a system that is even punishable by law, meaning I may not be a rich person who is able to, shelter homeless people, but I can suggest a system that would, and I could support a system that would. And so I'm trying to find ways within my own ability to try to, as Jesus said, pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's kind of the heart of why I suggest some of these things. That God's will is not only just is it done, it is systematically done, meaning it's not even something that it was just a good couple years where people were generous and they, during those winters, they let some people, no, they actually created a system that as long as that government is around, that system will then enforce God's will. To enforce, I know that sounds really dirty, right, to say to enforce, but what I mean is to enforce empathy. To enforce taking care of people's lack and hunger. To enforce this, not just through, because let me tell you something, people change over their life and cultures change. And you could have a time period where, like I said, there's 10 or 20 years of great generosity and then another 80 years of absolute callous indifference and suffering. And so you have to have systems, in my opinion. You need systems that help get you through those cold years so at least people don't suffer. I don't know how people are so against. I don't know how people are so for homelessness and so for the amount of money we just spent on just Ukraine alone, from what I heard, was enough to actually deal with and eliminate homelessness in America. And that is a giant slap in the face of America. This is a whole other subject, I know, but the fact that we live in the world's most powerful empire in human history, and we can't even take care of our own homeless problem. We can kill hundreds of thousands of people somewhere in the Middle East, but we can't even take care of hundreds of thousands of homeless people in our own country. Are you kidding me? Don't get me started. But let me get back on to the subject here. I'm talking, I think, mostly now to Christians by this point. I don't think any non-Christians would be this long into a recording. Okay. Is Jesus your Lord? Then live by his example. Do what he says. We're not perfect. You're not going to be perfect every dang day. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I'm holding you guys. You got to look. I'm sorry. I might even have to cut this out. That was so condescending. I'm sorry. Well, okay, no. It's fair, though. Okay, that's why I said it, because it's fair. I have lived under Jesus' example. I live under his example now, and I have for many years. So when I say you guys, what I'm talking about people who do not follow Jesus' example, but call themselves Christians. And so yeah, I am disassociating myself from. So yeah, it's fair. I'm got to cut this. I hate having to even try to cut anything anyway, because then it means I got to later on go back and try to find where I said this thing, and that's why I record these things and I post them. It's just I'm not even trying to cut stuff here. But that was a close one. I thought, man, that was condescending. You guys. No, I'm talking about Christians or people who call themselves Christians but don't live by Jesus' example, who don't agree with Jesus on everything, who they say that Jesus is only 80% their Lord. That's not me, okay? So that's you guys. Whoever that is, that's you. That's not me, okay? I didn't want to say we because that felt wrong, because I'm not in that group. I'm not somebody who thinks Jesus is only 80% my Lord, You guys. There you go. Okay, it's fair. Boom, justified. I should just go with it, Yeah. It just seemed condescending. I was like, you guys really need to get your act in gear. You know that? Really do. I think I need to wrap this up. Yeah, it's gone on like a couple hours now. I need to wrap this up. So, the first part was about forgiveness. I think I covered it pretty well. You have to forgive others if you want to be forgiven. It would be wrong or unfair for God to forgive you if you don't forgive others. You being in heaven and people in hell like, wait a minute, he's in heaven. He didn't forgive anybody. Why should he be forgiven? God's like, good point. Down to hell he goes. You have to forgive others if you want to be forgiven. Jesus taught that, so that's just a fact, okay? How you know you've forgiven others is if you have pardoned them, hoping that they do not go to hell. That's actually how you know you have actually forgiven them. I talked about forgiving and forgetting and how we're not really capable of forgetting. God can't expect you to do more than what you're capable of doing. We don't forget things. So you're not going to be able to forget what happened, but to forgive them, to hope that they have a change of heart, and to hope that they do not see hell because of that change of heart is how you know you have forgiven them. If you still hold this hope and desire that they go to hell for what they've done to you, then you have not forgiven them. You need to have a change of heart. You need to forgive them, okay? Or else you will not be forgiven. And it doesn't matter what your faith is. If you have not forgiven them, Jesus already said, if you do not forgive others, you will not be forgiven. And it doesn't matter what your faith is. Does not matter. All the faith in the world, if you do not forgive others, you will not be forgiven, okay? Take it up with Jesus if you don't like it. He's the one that taught that. I'm just telling you what he taught. So forgiveness. You have to forgive others. I talked about pride. Yeah, I talked about pride, and you got to let go of your pride. Pride is the driver behind pretty much all evil. Let go of your pride. Be okay with being average. You might be talented in some ways, but I'm saying like to just know that you're a citizen in heaven. You don't have to be the best. You don't have to be above everyone in your world or in heaven. Just can be okay with being average. Try that shoe on for a while. I'm average. There's a lot of us. We're all here. I'm just one of the people here. I'm not the most important one. Just average. Be average. Get rid of your pride. Be average. Be okay with being average. Talked about pride. Talked about the love of money. That's right. Talked a lot about the love of money. Talked about you should have no love of money. Jesus told the wealthy man to sell his wealth, give it to the poor, then follow him. Well, wealthy man wouldn't do it. And he lacked empathy. I talked about having empathy, guide you. I talked about the bad example that pastors, they do not live in Jesus' example. They may say words from Paul or Jesus, whatever, but they do not actually live by Jesus' example. They usually live better than their congregation. They live in bigger houses, better cars, and just live in general better than their congregation, which is the opposite of Jesus' example, as Jesus lived worse than most of the people he spoke to. And so if you're going to be involved in a church, you should find a church where the pastor lives in Jesus' example. And I'm sorry, that's going to probably be hard, but I'm just telling you, you're wasting your time at a church if the pastor himself cannot simply just live in the same example that Jesus set. You're most likely wasting your time. Or maybe you should be there for other reasons, maybe other people at that church, but the services and the pastor himself maybe don't really involve yourself with. Maybe it's something else. But you need to find, I think, a church where the pastor lives in his example. Talked about how I'm tired of lukewarm Christianity. People really need to make up their mind. Is Jesus their Lord or not? Are they going to love their neighbor as their self? How the world really needs that. I talked about law ideas, asset cap. I talked about communism. I don't think I could ever go one video without talking about communism and capitalism. It's very hard because it is a root behind so much oppression and suffering in the world. It really is. I did talk about that. Crony communism versus real communism. Crony capitalism versus real capitalism. But ultimately, Jesus was a communist. The early church were communes. And he was not a capitalist. He was not a blue-eyed European capitalist. Okay, get that out of your mind. He was an average-looking Jewish man, probably 5'8", who was a communist. I know it's so different from what you were taught, but anyway. So I talked about that. I really did talk a lot about Paul, the problems with Paul, and how some of the inconsistencies. He never once quoted Jesus on anything. He built his own churches elsewhere, and he was kind of doing his own thing. And his books sit right next to Jesus' books in the Bible. You have his letters, you have Jesus' letters, and you have Christians who idolized him. But they don't see it that way, and it's really sad. And let's see, talked about Paul, who never quoted Jesus on anything. How do you spread Jesus? Yeah, and how do you spread Jesus if you don't quote him on anything? Even in this recording, I quoted Jesus on a lot of stuff. How do you spread Jesus without quoting Jesus? That is hard to do. Yeah. I use the word Jesus because it's more specific. Paul would usually use the word Christ because that was just a position and a title. It's less specific. Anyway, okay. So I talked about Paul. I talked about the need for empathy and to love others as yourself. This is what Jesus told us to do. He said, what goes it to call somebody Lord, Lord, but then not do what he says? And so he told us to love others as yourself. You'll know them by their fruits. If you truly love God, you will love others as yourself. And that may not be easy to do for those who are new. I know. In fact, that almost would probably sound impossible, but that's a goal. It might be a long term, but that's a goal. That's where you should be. You should be at a point in your life, even if it takes years. It should be at a point where you are capable of respecting other people as yourself, not disrespecting others, not hurting other people. Okay, sin hurts other people. We're not here to hurt other people. And hurt feelings don't count. Jesus hurt the feelings of the Pharisees all the time with the truth. Okay, that doesn't count. I'm talking about exploiting people, stealing from people, cheating on people, murdering people. I'm talking about hurting people. Okay, it's sin. We were told to leave our lives of sin, our lifestyles of sin. We're not supposed to be living where that is a daily thing. Okay, we're not going to be perfect. Okay, we're saved by God's love, by His grace, by His forgiveness, but it is required of us. It is a sacrifice we put on the altar instead of some little innocent animal. We put our sins on the altar. Okay, we repent from our lifestyle of sin. We put our sins on the altar. We're giving that up to God. Okay, we're giving consent also to God to forget our sins. We have no love of the world. We have no love of sin. We understand that it's wrong. We long for heaven. That's where we just want to be in heaven. We have a shepherd who's leading us there. We're like little lights, and he's like the light who's leading us to the great big one. He is our shepherd. He's building us a home, as he said. He's making everything new. New bodies, a new world, a new kind of existing that is eternal. Eternal life. This was a temporary world. Things were tried. Things were tested. Most things failed. Some of it passed. Some of it came to eternal life. And that's what this world is. How God feels about you is your place in heaven. For those that He loves, they will feel great joy and great warmth and great love. And for those that He hates, they will feel His contempt and they will weep. It will be a very sad state. What you've done to the least of these brothers of mine, you've done to me. The measure you use will be used against you. So for those who also long for heaven and are tired of this world, I just want to say, I understand. I don't want to be here either. Haven't for years. And we need to remember that there are people in this world who have not yet come to eternal life. It was destined from the beginning. And so, meaning they will. But we play a part, in the salvation of some people. We influence something we do or say. We are here because of other people. And so even though we may have looked lost when we were younger, it becomes apparent as we get older that we are not lost. And so there are other people out there that might seem lost to you, but they are actually, believe it or not, they belong to God, and you play a part in their life. And so we're here not anymore for ourselves. For those of us who already know we're in heaven, we're not here for ourselves anymore, guys. And I think that we need to really learn to become more mature if you still think that that's a burden, that you're not here for yourself anymore. And I'm probably just speaking for myself here, sorry. But we are here for others. Now, if you're at a point where you already know that you are sealed in heaven, you are saved, your name's in the book of life, we are here for others now. That is the higher priority. And you shouldn't be so quick to judge and say, oh, that person's lost. You, I'm sure, or some of us at different times in our life probably look terrible and look terribly lost. And so, but at the same time, be efficient with your time, be prudent, be able to discriminate between somebody who is probably a waste of time versus somebody who it might be better times. It was the saying, you can have anything, but you can't have everything. You have to budget your time efficiently. You have to triage. You have to try to determine with your time, how is it best spent in this endeavor. Also, take time to rest. Take time to rest. Jesus said that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. You shouldn't feel like it's all on you, that you're playing your little part in a war. You're shooting your shot, so to speak, in a war, but you're not charging the front line and trying to stab the tank with your bayonet and declare victory. Like you're not doing the ramp. You know what I mean? Like, if this were a war analogy, I'm just saying, you're in the war, you're doing what you do when something comes down your way, but there's a lot of downtime in wars too. Don't fatigue yourself. No soldier can fight well if they're fatigued and they're losing their mind. What good are you then by this point? Your combat ineffective, so pace yourself. But anyway, okay, until next time.